what about the accountability of news organizations like the CAG mentioned NDTV and IBN for the CWG ads, which were given without any examination or without spreading it all over the channels, and see, in their audit they reported that there was wrongdoing over there. So why is it that journalists do not report on others? That story very few people carried.
I think that is a culture we have to change. We also have to change this culture of not sort of praising media organizations who've done a good story. I mean, Times of India, if some website or some small television vernacular breaks a big story, we have this tendency that other print newspapers will carry the story, but they will fail to mention the primary source of it.
Times of India,
I think this is
not allowed to mention any other brand unless they pay for it.
I mean, this is so absolutely, it's not just a problem with Times of India, it's a problem with all one. I mean, Times of India may be taken to a certain extreme.
No, but usually other news organizations do mention the source of somebody breaking a story.
But this is, they're violating the basic principles of news, and I think that the editors at some point do need to come together and get out of this pettiness. I mean, this pettiness is really sort of harmful, because if a small media organization breaks a story, they should get the credit for it, and you should be large-hearted to do that, because someday you yourself will go out and break a story.
Yeah, but it's no longer journalism, it's just brand.
Yeah, the selling editorial space in any manner of mean is a dangerous thing, because it spoils the social contract that we have with our viewers or readers. And we have a social contract that what we give you as news is sacrosanct, that there is no sort of commercial constraint, there is no extraneous factor coming in between our news and any motive. So if we have violated that, then it's a social contract that we break, and a lot of the problem that we are having now with respect to credibility stem from that.
And where is Matthew Samuel?
I think he's around. We keep having court cases, and he keeps coming in the Official Secrets Act case that we have against us. So I keep seeing him in courts.
How many cases do you have against you?
Well, at the peak I had about 15-20 cases. Right now there are 4 or 5.
Do you see any way that journalists can protect themselves against this?
I think we have to do something about criminal defamation in this country. It's outrageous that you have criminal defamation against media. Secondly, the state comes up every now and then with their versions of the broadcast bill, which they try to run as a mouse in order to control the media indirectly. And I think they never talk about improving or putting any clauses for the protection of the working journalist in terms of source protection, that the courts or anybody else can't compel you to talk about your sources, like we talked about a little earlier, in terms of protections from your harassment from state organs, you know, in terms of Whistleblower Protection Act. So, which is a big lacuna in our system. And
what do you think of Kajju?
I think that he has a certain views which don't sort of go well with being the press council chairman, because fundamentally you have to talk about freedom of expression, and his views on most occasions are sort of degrading the freedom of expression aspect of it in many ways. And I think you have to do it with a lot of consensus building. We know there's a lot of problem particularly with some vernacular media, and even with national what they don't realize is that print keeps harping about television, but print also has, and then now they're coming up with these internet laws. So it will affect every mainstream media, because they all have web sort of presence, and so it affects them equally. It affects the television, it affects print, so it's all converging onto one platform. So I don't think there's going to be any print or television, you can't distinguish them anymore, because everybody would have all presences in some form or the other. A print journalist would have certain videos on their sites, they would all have websites, they all have internet presences. So it's all converging on a peculiar platform. So as I said, you won't be able to distinguish between them very soon.
What were the mistakes in Tehelka as you look back in the Operation West End?
We definitely could have edited it to a much shorter version than we finally did. 4.5 hours is long. I mean, we were thinking print even in television.
I don't think it was the length. I think length doesn't matter in this. When you're doing something as a big story like this.
A television product, it does matter. Ultimately, a television product is there by default, because in these situations, the only reason you're using hidden cameras is that the burden of evidence that is required is much more than other stories. And because the burden of evidence is so high, so video comes by default. So it's basically you need to have that burden of evidence. That's why you go video. And when you create video, you have a product.
When I interviewed Arun Shourie at that time about this, and he had done, I would say, the first sting without a camera.
Kamla, yeah, that's right.
Kamla,
That's right.
So when he was editor of Indian Express. And he had at that time informed Chief Justice.
That's so bogus that you can't really, in today's context, go about informing authority of what you're doing, seeing the degradation of various institutions. You would never trust anybody with those kind of information, where the lives of your reporter.
One person you could trust, say Justice Verma or something.
No way. At least I wouldn't do that. I mean, so this is all bogus. You just have to go by normal common sense, and the way this law has developed in the UK and the US, which is very good, that you have to have prior information about certain illegalities being happening. So it is not so that it doesn't go into a fishing expedition largely. And in case those people are demanding some things, it has to be, in a sense, as I said, commensurate with the situation. So in that sense, I think if you follow that, and public interest obviously is the overall defining factor, I think you'll be right. I think by and large with journalists, I've seen that if you still believe that breaking the story is the biggest virtue around, and you get a thrill doing it, a journalist will always be okay. But if you find that the thrill no longer matters to you, then it's time to leave journalism.
I can't imagine it not mattering to anyone.
I think there are journalists today who it doesn't matter at all. That's the point I'm trying to make. There are a whole load of journalists that I see who see it as a product, and to them breaking a story is no virtue at all. Honestly, they don't even think of it as a virtue, which is where I'm coming back. You see, because that has failed to become one of their they are content being a face on television, handouts, etc., etc. So, as I said, that there is no longer a virtue right now. It's a virtue with just a few.